This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Mother's Day is almost here, and you can get her the most beautiful time-tested gift around. A watch she can wear every day from Movement. Whether your mom is into classic dress watches, rare and refined ceramics, or tried-and-true bestsellers, Movement has something she'll love. And right now, everything at Movement is up to 50% off site-wide during their Mother's Day sale. A watch is a gift that celebrates all the time you spent with Mom. And a Movement watch is even more than that. Movement uses industry-leading materials for their fresh, modern watch designs, from technically complex ceramics to vintage-inspired style, all for an incredible value your wrist and wallet will both love. And with one-size-fits-all convenience and fast free shipping and returns, it's a stress-free shopping experience. Save big on the best Mother's Day gift ever with Movement. Get up to 50% off site-wide during their Mother's Day sale at mvmt.com. Again, that's up to 50% off at mvmt.com.
We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Xcast. The truth is in here. My name is Kurt North and thank you for joining me on our continual coverage of the I Want to Believe movie, minute by minute. If you are new to us, and I don't know why you'd be joining us on minute 17 even, on an episode of the Xcast when there's 700 odd episodes before this. But if you are joining us, then feel free to come and find us on all the social medias. You can find us on our Patreon, where we have early episodes, ad-free access, and special episodes that have been recorded, including Drunk Watches, which I have partaken on many, and also get early access to episodes. So please, if you do want to join in with the fun on any early access, then please feel free to go over to the Patreon. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Xcast, and which you can find all the different tiers available to you all. And thank you very much for listening. As I say, we're here to continue our coverage of I Want to Believe, the second X-File movie. And joining me this episode is Luke Winch. Luke, you are back.
Greetings.
You survived.
Greetings, I am back. I survived the first minute. I survived the dorms.
We've talked about the Jeffersons. I never thought I'd ever talk about the Jeffersons in the Xcast, but, you know, these things are sent to try us. And now we've got quite a bit of chunkiness to this. We're looking at the next minute, and this minute is from 16 minutes to 16:59. And we get introduced, or Father Joe gets introduced to Fox Mulder, and he just replies, okay, which is wonderful. We have an interesting discussion that Scully has with him. She's not best pleased. And we have Mulder trying to lighten up the mood, which we sometimes or often will get, especially in these next few minutes. So I think first up, before we go into that, I just wanted to talk to you briefly about Father Joe and his redemption stuff, because there's the whole theme of this film is about redemption and reconciliation. And obviously having the priest aspect of it will naturally bring Scully into the fold. And in this episode, we're going to talk particularly about like things like forgiveness and the challenge of that, because, you know, Scully is Catholic, and as part of being Catholic within that framework of Catholicism, you know, there's the faith to encourage forgiveness as a virtue, and this struggle that Scully has at this moment is an interesting line to go down, really, the fact that they actually use that. And I think underlying that, if you look at it from a different kind of perspective, because she is also a mother now, you know, obviously had to give up William, but she still has those mothering instincts that, you know, there's the element of that as well. And I think it's really multifaceted in the way that they've done this for Scully as a character.
You got to think that the fact that she's kind of been thrust into a world that she didn't want to go back into, for starters. She's got the stress of everything that's going on at the church hospital and with the young lad and all the investigations going on with that and the fight that she's having to have with the wider kind of doctor community because they're all pushing back on her. So she's dealing with a lot of stress. And just the sight of seeing Father Joe praying with rosaries absolutely incenses her. You know, she's livid. And we usually don't see her like this, and it's really interesting just where she is in her life at the minute and all the factors, and seeing this. She is just absolutely livid, and she basically confronts him immediately before anything else started and goes, you know, why do you think God is going to listen to you? Why do you think you deserve salvation? Why are you praying? What I also find really interesting is how Billy Connolly delivers his lines in this scene. Because particularly where he says to her, well, I'm praying for the salvation of my mortal soul. The way he delivers it is almost comical in the fact that I'm just, you know, he says it in a way that, you know, he's kind of saying, well, it's obvious what I'm doing, isn't it? It's completely obvious. Why are you asking such a silly question? And that just incenses her even more. So she goes, well, I didn't bugger 37 altar boys. So it's a really interesting to and fro between these two. It's quite short, but it's so much happens on so many levels between those two.
Something I wasn't aware that was going to happen in this, because it's not something that I've watched I Want to Believe on numerous different occasions, and I do like the movie. I don't have any major issues with the movie. The biggest thing I think overall with this movie is it can be a little bit incoherent. And I don't mean that in the actual storytelling as such. Everything lines up and shapes up right. It just doesn't really factor in on the actual monster side of it. It's more worried about the themes and this kind of element. So when it comes to things like what are they doing with the arms, what are they doing with the girls, etc., it's hard to grasp. And I think that's an element. But this is kind of stuff that I've realised, actually, that I was mouthing these words. I was mouthing these before they came out the words. I was literally just going, okay, do you think God hears your prayers? Do you think he hears yours? I was literally like hearing it in my head before they were saying it. And as you say, the way that Billy Connolly delivers his lines throughout this film, it's very kind of, laid back and considered, and kind of style really is an intriguing way to go about it. And it also, as I say, like I'm not going to do it. I'm persuade myself not to do the Billy Connolly voice, but just the way he does it, it's very interesting that it's something you can get annoyed with if you wanted to have an argument with somebody, that somebody puts this kind of voice on, and it's hard to argue against because they're not going to raise to your emotional state. They're kind of like on a lower state than you. As I say, the whole concept of like Scully naturally having empathy, but there's none here, and I just find it interesting. Now, obviously, that will come to play right through the movie, and that's one of the things I like about this movie, is that it does that. But at this point, this is the main contrast. This is the main conflict that we're going to focus on between Father Joe and Scully, and then obviously you'll get Mulder trying to lighten up things by saying things like, "Oh, well, that's a colourful way of putting it." It's like, okay, there's the levity that you needed that maybe Millennium didn't really have. You didn't really have a Mulder that could do that. Just to like sort of, so it doesn't go too deep into the depths. I mean, this is a very deep and dark subject, and it's difficult balance to not to make light of. But at the same time, if you were having it in a more of a Frank Black-esque thing, it wouldn't have had the levity in it, and I think it would have struggled a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I've literally got the note here going, this whole conversation is quite millenniumistic.
Yeah.
Because it is all about, yes, it's about religion and forgiveness and all that, but it's also asking questions. Is God sending the visions? Is the devil? We're asking questions of the nature of evil. Is Father Joe evil because he has, performed these horrific acts on 37 young children? And Scully certainly, I think, in this particular scene, seems to think he's pure evil, which is why she has no empathy, which is why she has no forgiveness. And she's horrified with the fact that he's even trying to talk to God at this point. Mulder's quip, in that particular moment, it could be argued that was in slight danger of trivialising this whole particular bit, because paedophilia is such a horrific act that it could be argued that he's trivializing. But we know that Mulder's kind of defensive mechanism is to make light of a situation to help him cope with the horrificness of what it's going through. So it's an interesting conversation to have there as well, I think.
The levity, like before, the last one from last minute was slightly different in that it was the way that just avoid the activities room. It was very directed at the actual event itself. This one's kind of more of a defensive, okay, this is getting a bit dark.
Yeah.
You know, where it's a slightly different joke in that, you know, it's more of a case of like, oh, I need to like sort of distill this down rather than actually ramp it up. Whereas the activity room is like, almost like a joke that ramps up. So I think that even that minutiae of detail of like not trivializing it as such, because he's saying that's a colourful way of putting it, was more a case of, oh wow, this is deep and I'm not sure how I really feel about it. But then the previous one, the activity room, was more like a natural Mulder quip. So even that, you know, and those two lines are completely different. And you do right to mention the God and Devil thing, because obviously it's very small detail here, and I think the more I watch I Want to Believe, and obviously thinking about it for this event, is that there is a connection. There's a reason why he's getting sent these visions. You know, it will come into play much later on in the movie where he realizes why he was getting it, and there's quite a discussion later on about like, you know, it's quite akin that he's getting the vision of some of the things, not the person, and it's like, well, that's because his connection isn't with the victim. It's the connections actually isn't like an oubliette. The connection's actually with the perpetrator. And even that's quite fascinating. So the fact that he has to believe he hears him, or why would he be sending those visions? He's sending those visions because of that connection. Or, you know, we can question whether or not he's getting those visions because of that. But there's a definite link between the fact that, you know, later on we'll find that out. And I do find that, you know, this early on with just those, you know, maybe that's the reason why I struggle a little bit with the other side of it, because I think it could have been a bit more signposted, and maybe I'm giving it to it needs to people to think about it and actually consider the stuff that you're watching. I do think that obviously his side, the perpetrator's side, is kind of like a little bit too obscure, but there is the stuff that it all perfectly plays in, and I think that is good. Mulder does ask how he sees the vision as well, and we'll talk about this in a little bit in the next minute, but I do find that the grabbing a smoking cigarette, he grabs a cigarette, is something that we do see quite significant. I want to talk about it a little bit more next episode. It feels like it's not quite the same here, but it feels like it's a staging thing that happens quite a lot, where you just set your stall out. Okay, well, how do you get these visions? In my mind's eye, I did it. Yeah. See, I'm used to this. It's an awful impression, but it feels like it's like him setting himself up to warm up to do it. He does say at the very end of this minute, Father Joe says what he sees at the beginning of the movie is a woman being assaulted and a fight and dogs barking, and that's the end of that minute. So there is the setting up of the psychic stuff, which we'll go into next episode.
Yeah, I also think the lighting of the cigarette, in light of the kind of good, evil, God and devil, the fact that CSM was quoted as being the devil in quite a few times, I do find that the lighting of the cigarette is a good connotation, a good kind of allusion to CSM in that respect. Is like, it's particularly through Scully's eyes, at the fact that she, as far as she's concerned, she's looking at pure evil right now. So I did like that kind of allusion there, whether it was intended or not. But that's kind of what I got.
Yeah, where he dies of lung cancer. So where Father Joe actually does die. Cigarette smoking man will forever just be evil and, you know, take missiles to the face. But anyway. Okay, so anything for this minute before we move on to minute 18?
No, I think that's all my notes. I think, we've pretty covered that pretty well.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and for joining in. We will see you on the next episode, where we will talk about the visions and how he comes about them. So until next time, remember, as always, trust no one.